Okay, everyone, I think we are now live. So I'd like to say hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for today's artist talk. And Bassam, if you'd like to start us off, then we much appreciated it.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And I am very excited to be here and to simply launch this event. I am fortunate to have two more than able curators and authors and speakers handle the event for which they have been preparing and the project for which they have been preparing. And my name is Bassam Haddad. I am the director of the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason University. And I am very happy again to be here. This is a remarkable event and perhaps one of our largest this year. It's under the title Artists Talk, Geographies of the Future, Traveling the Arab Majority World in Virtual Reality. This is part of a series of events here at the Middle East and Islamic Studies program. We are very proud of this particular one, and we do have a couple more coming up. There's a huge list on our website, mes.gmu.edu. And these events have been sponsored by the Arab Studies Institute. And this particular one is also sponsored by the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown University and other sponsors, which I would like Jessica to share. She probably knows a bit more about some of the other sponsors. And Jessica and Bridget have been a remarkable set of curators who made me feel that this project, as we are trying to expand and develop it to the extent we can as a very junior partner, is going to actually be a formidable project. And I hope that we can keep up with this project, and maybe you guys can share with us where can people go to follow the news about the project. Thank you all very much. Thanks to the speakers, and I will be listening in the background and watching.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Bassam, for that very flattering introduction. And we are really, truly very grateful for the support from GMU and from Georgetown. And I'll just quickly mention that we're also co-sponsors of this event at the Middle East Center of the University of Pennsylvania, and of course, the Phillips Gallery at Franklin and Marshall College. Bridget, can I hand over to you to introduce yourself?
Sure. So happy to be here with everybody. I'm Bridget Guarasci, and along with Jessica, I'm a co-curator of the Geographies exhibit. I'm also assistant professor of anthropology at Franklin and Marshall College in Pennsylvania. And I'll just really quickly maybe say something about the overall exhibit and our approach, and then we're going to turn it over to, I'll turn it back to Jessica, who will say something about the structure of the exhibit. So, Geographies of the Future is intended to experiment with virtual media to render possible impossible worlds. Artists participating in the exhibit reimagine geographies of the Arab majority world in order to analyze political violence or chart anew known landscapes. One of the major aims of this project is to harness and redeploy technologies from mapping to virtual reality to gaming that have defined regional geographies according to imperial interests. Artists in the exhibit render a geography of the Arab majority world that refuses received categories of representation and articulates unexpected futures.
Lovely. So I just final thing I'll say before we hand over. So I'm the also co-curator of the exhibition and the strategic projects director at the Council for British Research in the Levant in the UK. And this particular exhibit will be a multi-site exhibit, so it'll launch simultaneously in the fall of 2020 at Franklin and Marshall College, the University of Pennsylvania, and a gallery space in Amman or Beirut, which is still to be confirmed. So I think to kick us off, if you don't mind, Ala Younis, if you could introduce yourself and your project, and hopefully the screen sharing should work smoothly.
Before you do that, I just want to confirm it's fall 2024, not fall 2020.
Thank you very much for having us. Yes, my project is called Battles in the Future Estate. I'm an artist, and I have many research and curatorial and publishing projects. I'm based in Amman, but I work from many places around the world, depending on what is happening in my life. So I'm gonna just put this thing a little bit fast forward because I want to get to parts of it. So there is a particular street. Okay, over the past decade, I've worked on so many projects related, or so many elements of histories related to architectural monuments in Baghdad, and this resulted in several projects and talks and a series of texts. But of the elements that came up from this research was the story of a particular street in Baghdad called Haifa Street. And this street was subject of development in Baghdad in the 1980s. It was a big project that was led by Saddam Hussein and himself, and by several prominent local architects such as Rifat Jadiji and Majd and other architects, but also with a group of international architects and contractors and designers and suppliers who worked on building high-rise complexes in the street over the course of 5 years. Initially, the project or this activation of the street was happening because of a non-aligned summit movement, a non-aligned movement summit that was supposed to happen end of 1982, but it never happened, but the works continue to happen. So this project basically, or the research, looks into the like 4 phases or 4 types of decades, or 4 types of the phases that the street has gone into. First, the area, what was happening in this area, in this street in the 1980s when it was being built by these international companies and contractors who were coming from all over the world, and how building a sustainable city, like a future city, was happening through a relationship with the local engineers and architects, and how the standardization of services was, or the standardization of the type of plugs and services that would be installed in the street, for instance, and the buildings on the street, were key to the maintenance of these projects in the future. So there's a fascinating history of the story of how this street comes together, all these buildings that you see here, and fast forward when it was built in the 1980s, that this project looks very much into. And the second phase is basically in the 1990s, when Iraq was going under international embargo, and the placement of the type of people who lived in the buildings, in these high-rise buildings, in this particular part of the city, or in the street, particular part of the street that was developed in the 1980s, could illustrate to us stark difference, or between the type of these people, of the people who resided in these buildings and the neighborhood, because of the poverty that was going around the times of the sanctions. We can see this stark difference, which also manifested in the lives of the graduates and the university teachers that were working and living in these buildings. So, and then the third phase is basically the post 2003 moment, after the fall of Baghdad, where the street becomes the front line, or becomes like an area of battles that were taking place between the former militia, the former Ba'ath soldiers or army, and the Qaeda militias and other militias that were in the city, and the American army, or the US Army, and how the international site, like internationally built site, becomes less subject of wars, that becomes like a site for wars, but also the cameras that shot this site at the time in the 2000s, around between 2003 and 2008, were military cameras, whether from either of the fighting sides. Just to mention that the last appearances of Saddam Hussein were had the Haifa Street in the background of his images. And so all these like buildings that we see on Haifa Street that were always published in magazines only from the exteriors, we start to see them from the inside. And what we see from the inside is basically rendered in the light of terrorism or US soldiers trying to enter these sites or the buildings from the inside, and they walk into homes and rooms and rooms of people, and they look into their stuff. So for once, we start to see everything that is inside, but with a particular, rendering. But we get also to understand how these buildings look from the inside, right? Because also far we have seen them from the outside, particularly for those who had never been to Baghdad or never been to inside these buildings at all. And then the fourth part or section is basically how some of these buildings are offered, or some of the apartments in these buildings are offered for sale online now. Maybe not necessarily this year or last year, but a couple of years ago they were. And they are posting again, their owners or the real estate agents are posting information and images about these apartments inside these buildings. And we get to see also again some of these buildings or some of these interiors from the eye of the inhabitant, the person who used the space, and how other people who might be interested in buying are looking at the same information and verifying it or challenging it. Or we are imagining, this would allow us also understand and imagine how the price and the location and the production and the quality and the story and the history and the inhabitants of a place could also be our possible real estate. So my project is basically trying to bring all these different layers of histories in one work. And I was thinking that something like a mix of augmented reality with mixed with the virtual reality planned over like some sort of a model of Baghdad or of this street in Baghdad would maybe help us think about how we can access locations with their own histories in a way that would make us also kind of reinstitute the gaze of of not just a local or of a human that is inside this in these contested or congested spaces. That's what I can say for now about my project. Thank you. So some of the footage here, you see the American soldiers as they walk into the space.
Thank you, Ala, for the fascinating images and also the kind of description of the project you gave there. What I'll do is maybe ask one question now, and Bridget, if you would like to ask one question now, and then we can move on to the next work and have a bit more time for discussion later on.
Maybe we should just let the artists present the works, because I want to make sure we give them enough time and then have an informal conversation after.
Okay, sure, no problem. Let's begin on that then. Okay, in that case then, Barış, would you mind taking over? Thanks.
So, hi everyone, I will share my screen maybe for the short presentation. I think we have this. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Barış Doğrusöz. So thank you for inviting me for this project, and we'll try to make a short introduction to my practice and the project and works we are thinking to present for Geographies of the Future. So I'm working with a large range of media, depending on the artistic strategy that I want to engage my research with. And it goes from video installation to sculptures to immersive environment, film and sonic composition. So for Future of Geographies, we have been discussing to include 3 pieces. So I will go back now because it's going too fast. That have been presented recently in SALT in Istanbul and at the Biennale EVA in Ireland. And the whole project is called Locus of Power, but they have a previous name called Theater of Operation, which is centered on an old outpost city and today an archaeological site which has been partially destroyed during the Syrian conflict and where the war is still active today. It's the name of the site is called Dura Europos. It's in the Syrian province of Deir ez-Zor, and located on the bank of the Euphrates River near Iraqi border. So I'm based in Beirut since 2015, but I'm also living also in Istanbul and in the south of Turkey. Depends the situation and my travels. So yeah, many events in the south of Lebanon in 2015, and way before also in Gaza, brought me to deepen my investigative research into the origin of tunnel warfare or mining warfare through the territory. And it's where I came across the most documented site of the ancient city of Dura Europos, with its life cycle, its walls, enclosing a rich cosmopolitan environment, its transformation into a military garrison, its abandonment after its falls, its rediscovery in the last century, and its contemporary destruction during the war in Syria. So the evidence of destruction were recorded through archaeological excavation reports, and more recently through remote sensing imagery. All these markers and features resonate through multiple paths to envisage the active process of destruction through a different temporality, and to evoke the aesthetic of ruins and the issue of representation, the current conflicts, and the rereading of colonialist discourse and the variable values placed upon these ruins. So from the collecting process to the from the collecting process to the indexation of and transformation towards the conceptualization, there's a long period of defining a multi-temporal frameworks in which I can create a space and render a cognitive mapping of all the force and processes at play. So there's many layers of temporality, which will start in minus 150 to 300. And the city has like a lifespan of 500 years. And it was a Roman garrison, which was defeated by the Sassanid and the Persian. And after it was defeated, it was abandoned, and the sand recovered the city. It's 2 days before the application of the Sykes-Picot Agreement that the city was uncovered in a weird historical symmetry. The British soldier had to give the land to the French mandate. So they go on this. They went to this sort of valley, and while they were digging a trench, they find a painting, and the painting was actually the last painting done there, called The Fall of the Dura Europos. So there was like this historical symmetry. So it took me to think about, actually at a meta level, to think about this city, the records in time, like the modern record of time, and there's the different period of renation, which means like this is an active process. There is like the first renation by the Romans, then it changed over and was finished with the Persian, and then the British soldier will come, and then the French and the American excavators. And in the 80s, the French will excavate again, create a museum there. And in a way, excavation is also a destruction, because a lot of artifacts were uncovered from the sand, but the sand was preserving the city during a long time. So the renation process continued over the time, and then the war started, and many imagery coming from satellites start to show like a kind of a moonscape. And today, actually, this is the place is just next, actually, a very important oil field in the north of Deir ez-Zor, and it's actually the place where still the militia are operating to get the control of the fields. So this is the base of my project, and it's developed in three video installations, and a lot of documentation that will be still merged to another piece to finalize, and the book So this site becomes like a place where, for me, that I've decided to transform as a proto-fictional place, where I can unfold many temporality and collapse the history and the present history, and also the way actually the narrative is like created and the soft power is engineered until today. And the project will be, for the exhibition, will be probably, we'll rethink about all the pieces together, and they are working as devices. You will see many screens, but the screens actually are like an image holder, and as image holder, we can also say place or holder, where we can put the same films in the different structures, and those films are updated upon actually the new event and the new reports are coming. So that's the base of my project for the exhibition right now.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to hand straight over to Huniti Godox, so over to Areej and Eliza next. Thank you.
Okay, now can you hear us? Yeah. Okay, so we're Huniti Godox. We've been working together for the past 3 years, and the main focus of our research is water ecologies. And our research started in Amman, and then we went to Tunis, and then to Leipzig, and now we're in Tirana in an artist residency as well. The work that we will present is the Dido problem, which is a work that we developed as part of our residency in Tunis. Now you can see some snippets of it being played out. And for this, so the starting point for the work is the mythology of Dido, or Alisa, which is the founder of Carthage. And like we read her story as someone who flew from oppression, and then she arrived to the North African coast to find a place to live, basically. And then when she arrived there, she asked for a piece of land to live, and then she was given the challenge that she can take a piece of land that can be encompassed by an ox hide, like the skin of the bull. So she takes the skin and then she cuts it into a long, thin strip, and then she marks a territory. So we used her mythology or her story as a starting point towards this intuitive approach to land and territories. And then in the film, in the beginning of the film, you see all these digital renders that try to reenact her story in different locations. And then it extends into the territory of, or like the reality of Tunisia. So in the film, we did like a public intervention where we tried to find Dido in the everyday. So if you see her on a structure going through the streets of Al-Medina in Tunis, and then we're asking people, have you seen Alisa, have you seen Dido? And they're like, who's Dido? And they're like, yeah, Dido. And then it was almost like a way to start a conversation about what does it mean to see her in the present, and how can this open up a space for imagining different possibilities. And then we tried to also connect her story to different materials. So you see, we like connecting her to water, to soil, and to also other women that we met in the country. And then we went, and part of the film is also trying to imagine or like the future of the Mediterranean when it dries out. And we used the landscape of Shatt al-Jarid, which is in the south, as an imagination of the future of the Mediterranean. And now you can maybe jump in.
Mm-hmm. And as part of the work that we also want to show for Geographies of the Future is a work called Rising Up from Halite, and it's continues where the Dido problem ends. So it basically imagines the Mediterranean as a dried out territory, because like in all our research, we realize that the Mediterranean is some kind of core water body, but from any kind of place we go, it has a different kind of meaning, like especially in the Tunisian coast. We've been to Jaziz, and a lot of people crossing from there. Albania is, now we're doing the research, and it's a narco state, and it functions as a drug traffic route to Europe. So like it has is very charged and is accused of a lot of violence. So we are planning to do a work that is a virtual reality and imagines the Mediterranean in the future as a dried out space where water molecules transformed into salty crystals, and the viewer of the VR work finds themselves walking, crossing from Tunisia towards Sicily, and they're surrounded by avatars that represent survivors of the European border genocide as well, as a form of resistance, but also as a form of kind of like the dryness. So the work is called, I don't know if I said, Rising Up from Highlight, and it's a work in process, and it's now also part of an online exhibition curated by Clara Cartuccia. She has this online platform Ex-Nunc, and there's a 360 image basically where you can find yourself in a also computer generated space. And basically we can also show this part. This is how the Dido problem ends, and for the exhibition we are imagining to show the film, but then also showing like an immersive space where you're surrounded by this kind of salt desert.
And just one thing to add, so this salt desert, Château Girid in the south, it was imagined by Roder, as a French colonizer, to be flooded with the Mediterranean as part of his Sahara Sea project. So using this as a landscape for future imagination, but also as a landscape that was so much imagined to be intervened with, to be changed in terms of like its climate and its like also geographical relevance, and it's seen as a desert, which is seen as something that is a lack of something. So yeah, and this is, so like the work will have it's almost like a multi-layered in terms of elements. So it will have the Dido problem as an experience, but also it extends into this imagination of the future of the Mediterranean, but you experience it in a VR kind of way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I see that Majd has popped in a question that sort of relates to your project, but I'm going to ask Majd if you just hang on to your question for a second. Maybe we can hear from Ali and Ahmed, and then Majd, if we have you to sort of round us off, and maybe you can introduce your project and also maybe kick off the discussion with that question. So thank you, and over to you, Ali and Ahmed. Thank you, as in Ahmed Isamaldin. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having the chance to work together and to be here. Actually, I'm really happy in the first place also to work with Ahmed, because through this project, we are might be slightly different, our project or our approach, because we're starting from a dialogue between us, which is started almost since 2 years ago. And as you might know, maybe these last 2 years ago was slightly different as well. So we started from the momentum of, there was the uprising in Iraq and Sudan as well. And that moment we have a mutual, we're sharing the house and the neighborhood and the place, like the same atmosphere in the city here in Berlin. And so we started from that momentum, and it extended to going through a bunch of readings, writing as well, reflecting of histories and the current political situation. So, and this is what our piece would look like, or what our interpretation to input to this show will be. It's this dialogue. So it might be, I don't know yet, no form. It's really hard to tell what is form at this momentum. But the thing that we are in this phase of this ongoing discussion, which is this show, it's extension to our comradeship, friendship, and discourse, because we found it's like, maybe this thing, we need to give it in a body of things, and that like a body of exhibition, or and when the invitation happens, like this is the momentum, you know. So it's this chance, it's both about learning and unlearning through this journey, you know. So it's like people here, they are more in having precise think and so on. So we started, for example, from the momentum of plural, or the plurality of histories, like, because when we're talking more, like if I'm talking about something as Iraqi, Arab, blah, 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 as I'm in my head saying one history or one thing, but Ahmed all the time keeping, it's like, yeah, but dude, it's about this and that and that. And we're talking about geographies all the time, like we echoing each other, and we kind of, I would say, like this multi-layers and complex how the geography of the area and of our histories, you know, it's because, and
It's also about so one of our dialogue is one of the labor that we had to do, like kind of to represent the resistance movement that happened in 2019. So part of it, somehow we thought in like the narrow scope in order how to represent this movement in artistic and political practices, the descriptions, not historicized movement. It's historicized through the critical work and the colonial description, the critical work of colonial descriptions. So basically, and that between the image, the imperial image, or the anti-Orientalist image that are reflecting that movement. So first of all, we like part of our even critical engagement in this project is like that the fluidity of geography, what so-called Arab world, what's called Middle East itself. It's more of a kind of a political manifestation of like somebody else described that area. But the history of us, me and Ali, is most of also entangled at the same, the history of the political movement and resistance happened there. So through this, we decided to go and to read through histories, like to give say kind of examples that we cannot describe the history of Yemen without describing the history of Ethiopia and the resistance of Yemen in that history of Ethiopia, without like also talking about the slave revolutions in the Middle East and all of like the what do you call it, the Middle Eastern slave market, and all of this kind of the Nubian Egyptian war as part of the history of Middle East and Arab activity. So we decided to go and read and pick stories from history and to use the medium as a reflection. So like a medium of augmented reality is what we choose, because we saw through the augmented reality that you could give different perspective of reality. So you can implant in the map of reality, what do you call it? It's not just virtual, it's like it just exists reality. We can implement on it a CGI, computer-generated image, game object that represent those stories from different perspectives. So you are in part of the exhibition, but you can see different stories that represent our dialogues through this augmented reality. So we have a lot of map, we have confusing stories that they come together, happen in the same geography. So that's what.
Yeah, like it's and where that started from when talking, hey Ahmed, that back days we were reading together Hadi al-Alawi and about it was unrepresented شخصيات غير تاريخها في الإسلام, unstable or the uncertain characters in
Islamic history.
Islamic history, and saying hey about Thawrat al-Zinj, and I told that momentum when the guy like hold that flag and put it in that district in Basra. What about do it now in the same neighborhood or in the same place? You know, about searching and looking for these momentum in the history, which is still being there, you know, because this is of what's being told in media and so on. It's like, this is what you're expecting of CNN, you know, it's something, it's not there anymore. And this nostalgic, it's, I wear in Syria, but in Syria before 2010 or before the revolution. So we are more about this, the place which exists there. It's the people, it's the history, and it's not untold thing, but it's that momentum. And when we said we might make a journey or mapping this thing. So this mapping, so because this is also from our experience as immigrant, refugees, wherever, you know, it's even like while we're talking, the access to a place or the certain place, we are not equal in that, you know. So it's also about this mapping, but mapping on more form of reading or the conversation, because I can't tell the story or my certain momentum without Ahmed in a specific context. We're talking about the, but we find this is really something for both of us and for the project by default. It's really enlightening and really helping to reflect, or to how we could say, to show us our curriculum stands in our realities on daily level, you know. So that's what, yeah, like what was about the breaking the.
Yeah, I think part of it is also breaking, like not just the Oriental Occidental definition of the Orient, is also bringing news, and that we also have. We choose to look at the resistance in this area, history, in order to say that there's a plural history in that area. It's not just Oriental Occidental. It's not also a very revolutionary movement that you need to have a solidarity with in order to change the world. It's very complicated, and to historicize that, we need to look at kind of not just the exotic. It's more of like the dialectical entanglement between resistance and power in that area. So that's, I think, we wanted to go through it. We have some kind of readings like Khalid Alawi, like Ali mentioned, and also we're reading Churchill, by the way, the river war in Sudan and how he looked at us. It's very, just we wanted to like pick those stories and put them in augmented realities. Yeah, I think this is probably it. No, yeah, that's it. Is it 10 minutes? It's a dialogue, confusing.
And that's the reason we're super excited to be like here with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. We're excited to have you here also. Majd al-Shihabi and Ahmad Barclay, if you'd like to take over now, thank you.
Thank you. Majd, did you want me to put up the slides, or you're good now?
I think, can everyone see my slides? Good, okay. They're still visible, good. Thank you everyone for having us. It's this project, Palestine Open Maps, has been a project that both Ahmed and I have been working on since officially kind of, or like the most significant starting point was 2018, but it's Ahmed had been thinking about it and preparing for it for much longer. It started with this map that you can see here. If you go to palestineopenmaps.org or palopenmaps.org, you will see it. And in an event in 2018, we sponsored by Visualizing Palestine, we compiled a set of historical maps of Palestine made by the British colonial authorities, of the British Mandate authorities in the 30s and 40s, into one massive map. I don't know if you can see it here, but all of these squares, they're like, each one of them is an individual map sheet that we cut up and stitched together with the help of a group in at an idea lab, Visualizing Palestine Idea Lab. And what we did is, like, we created this navigable slippy map that has 155 map sheets combined into one. And then we were thinking, like, what do we actually do with this? It is a very different way, obviously, of looking at the historical maps. But how do we make this a more like a useful project for the rest of us? We noticed that there is a layers aspect of the project. So this is my grandparents' village. It's called Lubia. It's in the north of Palestine, halfway between Tabariya and Galilee. This is what it looks like on the map, and this is what it looks like today. The bold area in the middle of the forest is where the buildings used to be. And the green orchards that were around no longer are, and have been turned into what is called now the South African Memorial Forest. What I've, with the support of the Bassel Khartabil Fellowship and Free Culture Fellowship and Visualizing Palestine, I started running mapathons where I got people to extract the data out of the maps in a collective way. So, and as we extracted the data, we realized that there is a layering effect that happens. So here you can see that the polygons or the data that we extracted from the historical map layered over the satellite imagery of today, and it looks like the ghost of Lubia is hovering over the settlement that replaced it and the forest that replaced it. The mapathons look like this. They're like 20-30 people in all of different places around the world, like in Burj Shmali, that was the first one in Lebanon, in the refugee camp in Lebanon. And we've done them also at the British Library, which houses the collection, one of the copies of the maps, and everywhere else in between. I've done 24 of them so far. And the data that we extracted is a lot. It looks like this. We haven't extracted all of the data, but we're working on it. And it's a systematic, collaborative project that entangles a lot of people in it. And Ahmed, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so kind of on different tangents, we've done a couple of exhibitions based around the same maps and around Palestine open maps. This image is from Jameel Art Center in Dubai, and it was an exhibition that we did. It must have been the beginning of 2020, I think.
It was just before the pandemic. It's February 2020.
So when it was had already hit China, I guess. And yeah, so this was kind of, I mean, I feel a little bit like this side of the kind of public space aspect of the project has kind of been on hold since this point. But this was one of two exhibitions relating to the project, and it was really about showing. It was a kind of multi-medium kind of event around the maps. There's another project called a National Monument, which we worked on with Marwan Rashmawi, which was the artist, Palestinian Lebanese. And yeah, we created 20 different cities as kind of three-dimensional reliefs based on these historical maps as well, kind of combined with actually NASA kind of shuttle radar topography mission elevation data. So it was, I feel like through all of these projects, it's sort of about these different layers. This was the original version of that exhibition in Beirut Dar al-Nimr, which was the year before, I think, if I remember correctly, probably 2019. And yeah, we've kind of worked through these projects, and I think for the next stage, you know, the aim is to kind of go further with the layering and with the different
precisely. So one of the things that, as you can see here, what Ahmed did is print out the maps, like all of this massive map sheet, as you can see here, print it out at 1-to-1 scale and just set it on the ground. And what it created is just a very strange way of, like, when you walk on the map and when you sit on it, it's kind of like hovering around Palestine and flying over it in a way. It gives you a different perspective of the topographic details. And it's like maybe it's the closest that a lot of people have gotten to walking on Palestine. And a lot of people will ever get to walking on Palestine, especially speaking of Palestine refugees. And like one of the projects, the side projects, the spin-off projects that came out of this Palestine Open Maps is Ahmed's work with the Palestinian Oral History Archive, which was compiled in the 90s, given in custody with the American University of Beirut, and was and as the indexers and catalogers looked at the maps content, or at the testimony content, there are testimonies from people who knew Palestine before 48, they noticed that there's a lot of place names mentioned. So what they did is they cataloged and indexed every single time that a place name is mentioned. And what Ahmed did is to cross-reference that with the map, with the place names that are mentioned on the Palestine maps pre-48. And what he created is this view. here, which so if you zoom into Haifa, for example, you will see the Haifa municipality, and you click on the Baladiyat Haifa municipality, and you see the interview that took place there. And if you click on it, it goes to that interview where they talk about Baladiyat Haifa. You want to see Knesset Mar Elias, that St. Elias Church, you will see the interview that talks about it. Barclays Bank, not no association with Ahmad Barclay himself, or not that I know of. You can see the
surprising number of mentions though in the archive.
Surprisingly high number mentioned in archive. You will see it here. So what we're thinking about in this project is to kind of play around with the metaphor of these layers, in combination with this like massive effort of extracting data out of the map. There's a few directions that we're heading in. One is, can we kind of replicate this sorry, I'm trying to navigate. Here it is. Can we replicate this process of walking around combining the walking around around the map with the process of navigating oral history through virtual reality? As you move around a virtual space of the map, can you hear the testimonies that relate to the spaces that you're walking around in? And of course, collecting, as we mentioned, the place names, can we juxtapose those with the history, the history of the migrations, or not the migrations, but the expulsions rather, of Palestinians from their homelands to the refugee camps. So I grew up in the Yarmouk camp, and every street is like, my grandparents' street was on Lubia. Sorry, my grandparents' house was on Lubia Street, one of the major streets of Yarmouk camp. Every street name is named after an ethnically cleansed village or place name. Can we create a juxtaposition between the place names that are on the maps here with the spaces that the refugees reproduced in the refugee camps as a juxtaposition? And that's the direction that we're heading in. It's, of course, it's a work in progress, and we're excited about to see it materialize over the next year or so. I think that's brilliant. Unless Ahmed wants to add something.
No, not really. I think you covered it really well. I feel like, yeah, I've taken a bit of a backseat in the presentation, but I think I'll have more to add in the discussion. So I think you summed it up really well. So
thank you.
Work in progress. I think is the biggest part of the summary probably, but it's great that we've got so much time to think about it and develop it.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think that's one of the exciting things about having such a long lead time before the exhibition. Obviously, the ideas came out of conversations that Bridget and I were having in the pandemic, which was the Ala Younis mentioned. And so, yeah, I think we're really privileged to be able to have this kind of discussion that, yeah, and see this sort of interconnectedness between different works or parallels that can be drawn. And in fact, I wondered if we can kick off the discussion just before the questions, Bridget, that we had in mind, maybe between Majd and Areej and Eliza, partly Majd, the link you shared, and Areej and Eliza, the piece that I think of your previous work you didn't mention, that does involve kind of oral histories in a virtual reality space. And I wonder whether that might be an interesting kind of parallel to draw at this point. So yeah, if you don't mind, whoever's ready to go ahead.
Yeah, there was our first virtual reality work actually, where we did a research on a buried water stream in Amman. And we kind of thought about how can we kind of make an intervention in a way that people would understand also the city in a way with the reality of water, basically. So we took a 360 footage from an existing park, and then created a space where the viewer finds themselves surrounded by water, basically. Because the water stream got buried in the process of urban development, and people talk about it, but it's also some kind of forgotten narrative. So we asked people, at the same time, we presented it in public space. We didn't want to present it in a space, in a gallery or something. So they find themselves in an existing concrete structure, but surrounded by water, basically, yeah.
And the oral history aspect of it is that we interviewed a lot of women that came to the city, like that they had a connection to another body of water. So like somewhere from Iraq or Syria or Palestine. And then it was about like how would one relate to their bodies differently if water was present, because water is absent in the city, but how also the identity of the place is so much shaped by what it's not. So Amman is always seen as not Palestine or not, you know. So there was also trying to bring it back into the city and seeing how that can, what can it give to the viewer, but also being in this on site. So you're standing on a concrete kind of structure, but then everything around you is water. And then you see all these stories that hint into the voices of the women that, or like of other people who came to the city, and how that shapes the city as a transitory place or what have you. So yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And sorry if I'm sort of pulling out parallels there, but I'm just getting very excited at the opportunity to hear you all speak about these works side by side, I guess. Bridget, do you want to kick us off with the formal part of the discussion section?
Sure. This is wonderful, you guys. I'm so it's lovely to see where the works are now, and also to see the resonance between them. Some of the things that really stand out for us when we're thinking about the works as a collection is the emphasis that each one of you places on research, and the concept of the future that you imagine is also historically located. But each one of you has said that part of that future that you imagine is a sort of re-engagement of history, not necessarily from the sort of dominant ideologies or even locus, sort of central points on a map that have driven our own understanding of those historical events. So I'm wondering if you could maybe, anyone who wants to jump in, and I'm hoping that as we talk to each other, you know, we'll start to get some ideas that we can riff off of each other. So, you know, please, this is like very informal. Don't hesitate to jump in if you have an idea. I'm just wondering if you could talk about like what the future is to you, or how you understand your work as speaking both to a sense of history, but also looking forward into the future.
I could say something on that. I think because I think there's sort of the obvious like elephant in the room with the presentation on, you know, mapping Palestine is Israel, and I think that's the reason, you know, why you need to kind of reclaim a historical map before you can talk about the future. So I think, I mean, that's really the only point I wanted to make, but I think that's why it's hard to imagine a starting point for imagining the future that only starts in the present. So I think that's part of the context. And I think the other thing is that, you know, this process of the kind of mapathons as well, of the kind of the new generation looking at, you know, these maps and digitizing these maps and tagging these maps is also an interesting kind of exercise in itself. And I've been much less involved in the mapathons than Majd, but I wonder, yeah, how we can kind of capture some of the energy that was, you know, in the conversations in those rooms, and how we can kind of bring that into an exhibition space as well.
Yeah, I give a talk sometimes called that I title archival archives as training grounds for democracy, and to me, like the work that I do is not is first and foremost, the goal is political, right? Like I'd rather see us, like the reason why we do the mapathons, as opposed to just, I could have, like when I got the Bassel Khartabil Fellowship, I could have just spent an entire year just working on vectorizing every single item and object on the map. Instead, with discussion with Ahmed and a few collaborators, we decided on running the mapathons instead. And with the mapathons, we have kind of entangled like hundreds of people into the process of extracting the data. And once you do that, you kind of get this really interesting effect, which is, I'm going to share the screen again, and I'm going to show you one image. Hopefully it's right here, and this is a mapathon that I ran in the Dawi refugee camp. I talk about it all the time because it's my favorite mapathon, where Palestinian Syrian refugees, who are again refugees in Lebanon, came to the mapathon, and they saw the villages and the maps that their families are from. For the first time. They didn't see them from the ground level, they saw them as a virtual map, but it was one of the first time that they actually see an artifact as opposed to hear about it. And it's and I think using like in archival practice, there's something, there is a political decision at every step of the way. Like there's a political decision in how you collect the archive and how you catalog it, how you index it, and how you publish it, and how you activate it. And all of that is, as you think about it, it becomes like a motivator for thinking about the future. And it helps you kind of turn the future imagination of what we think about, like democracy in Palestine, right? Like we want to end apartheid Israel, and we want to, from my perspective, I don't speak on behalf of the project, I want there to be a one-state solution. A way to imagine that is to imagine what to practice democracy in a way, and the archival work is part of that, and that's why we get as many people involved in it as possible.
I would like to share something just about like part of the input in the research. I will also just share my screen just for one image very fastly. Somehow the project I worked in is part of the conversation that I also have with Ali, worked in 2019 about like reclaiming the fluidity of maps that exist in that region. If you see in those spots, somehow it's a spots of a like ethno-cultural group and being divided by the colonial borders. Talk about like Tawarig in the blue, the Berber, the Tawarig, the movement between Niger, Mali and Algeria. And we also talk about like Fulani and Fulata in Nigeria. We talk about Zakawa in Sudan and Nuba between Egypt and Sudan. And somehow what I'm thinking about it also from like part of this nation archives or border archives that is not it is not giving possibilities to other narratives, the narrative of the indigenous or the narrative of the movement, the fluidity of the border, which is I would think about the future in this scope, in giving other narrative that didn't have like what calls like what Fanon said, the middle class bourgeoisie perspective of maps and countries, that it is somehow is still continuous discourse by an elitist politics exists in the areas, also artists reproducing that. So how we could introduce fluidity of map in the so-called whatever, east or south, because still there is this
more details in a week or something like that.
I'm happy to keep talking. It's only if someone wants to call or they have a question. I'm not qualified to answer really, or something sticky comes up. I don't think it will. I think I'll just get should be around, or I'll let you know in a couple of weeks, or answers like that, or nothing.
Molly, would you be able to put your mute back on? I can't mute you, but it feels, I think your audio is coming through here.
So yeah, I think that's fine, because then by the time,
sorry guys, this is a technical glitch that we're having. Apologies, not quite sure how to fix it.
I think too. It's just maybe it'll be in their brain at least, and they'll be sort of aware of it. I think
okay.
Send this schedule such as it is to Rich.
You know, we're also in a virtual space today, and unexpected things happen. So
it's likely to change.
Hey, Molly.
Change, but I think just so he can start thinking about
Molly.
Chat with
I'll do that, because I've got an ongoing dialogue with him about that. So I can just share this link with him, can't I?
Yeah.
So I think that would be
okay, guys.
Sooner rather than later. I think it's completely terrifying to have the crew in the country without their visas.
Sorry about this, everybody. And
I do.
I mean, it's like, it might just be what you need to get.
On ASI Live, we often have these technical glitches, and I think as a viewer, it's very charming and makes it much nicer. And thank goodness it's over. So thank you very much for your patience. And I'm really sorry. Were you finishing off your point there? Did you want to continue?
I think the point is also finished by this intervention somehow, like the fluidity of the virtual space somehow. And there's no authority to decide where is the map and who can actually mute who. I think it's also funny that to think about future in this way of like the fluidity of map is quite dreamy, utopian at the same time, but there's a people fighting for that. And I think I could imagine to look at the future from the scope of the indigenous North African. Yes.
Yeah, but something also re-echoing Ahmed and the other Ahmed. And so when sometimes, like, well, not sometimes, when I'm saying al-Nakba mustamira, or the Nakba is ongoing, and so on. So it's starting from that point. And when we talk about conversation outside in the street about it's now, because most of the time it's not about the history, rather than this momentum which is get expanded for the maximum, and we are part of that. And especially if talking about borders, bodies, you know, we are still till now we are part of this. So it's about now, you know, rather. And this is also about the pandemic last year. So I think there is a momentum about to reflect on this, or not to reflect. I hate that word really, and I don't know why I keep using it. But yeah, it is. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, maybe picking up on the thread of kind of archival research. Ala, I know that your project included archival research at the sort of inception of it, and I wondered if you wanted to speak on that here, and if not, then don't worry, we can move on.
Yes, I think the archives, they are not just archives, they're also collections and the whereabouts of some stuff that could be informative, or could also bring us to interesting readings, you know, also individual readings of the situations that we could read from different perspectives, from different sources, or from different like moments of historization or acts of historization. And so there is a lot of materials that are related to the architectural projects themselves, whether from the architects or the magazines, the architectural magazines that published on them, or the local infrastructures, as I mentioned, that commissioned these works and kind of produced on them as well. The architects that photographed these, or like when they printed them on stamps, for instance, or there's also the contractor companies that built these projects. They had their own also, you know, like workshop drawings and all sorts of materials. They also had some videos or some promotional material, because again, these works become like, the CV input for a future projects that they wanted to get anyways, whether in the region or somewhere else. And many of these things, they find their way on YouTube or online video sharing. They're shared online as videos or as other documents. There's also the whole bunch of or batch of videos that are filmed by the US Army or by the soldiers that were climbing up these buildings and raiding the houses or the apartments. And many of these videos were posted by the soldiers themselves online and with like tags, tagging the locations or the dates or something like some sort of information that is related to the site, which I find also very interesting. There's also people who have like, there was like also in the late 80s and also in the 90s at Iraq, it was super advanced and a lot of electronics were making their way there. So there's a lot of like cameras, people shooting things themselves. And there's more and more of these materials coming up now, also again on YouTube, but also on like other ways, like some people try to find a way to share these materials. And so the night shots that I showed were taken from, or the 1993 shots were taken by home videos. Like it's like more of a home video situation. And there is a couple of films, like fiction films that were produced by the state, in which the location features in these films. And it's interesting also how, like in one of these films, like the main character kind of was in insomnia somehow, you had like a memory loss incident for a few years, only to wake up and see a whole like city emerged in the Baghdad that he used to know. And so big part of, or like one large part of that film was about like just like seeing all these monuments or these buildings and walk through them. And this walkthrough was really nice because it can show us not just the buildings, but also all the public spaces that are between them. So basically where they had fountains, where they had public monuments and artworks, we can see them. And we can also see the distances between the buildings. And so it was for the first time that I felt also what is Haifa Street is when I was watching this. And I felt as if I'm like walking near the National Gallery in London or something, where the distances are vast between very big monumental buildings. And that's in fact one of the times that I felt that maybe that should be an experienced presentation where we can understand also distances somehow if we can, or see them or kind of interpret them in a different way than, all these like miniature drawings that produce of anything. And other stories. I mean, other materials like such as this real estate website that has the information or the people as they comment on it, or there's also groups related to inhabitants of Haifa Street, which are, I mean, they're super fond of their neighborhood and proud of it, and they take a lot of footage or a lot of videos from today's time that is online as well. Yeah, and there are all these testimonies that I'm interviewing people and getting some information that is not necessarily published, or aspects that are not there in the publications or in the videos. So like a variety of things.
Yeah, Ala, that work is amazing. And I think you do such a great job of showing the sort of war in a very, and the story of political ambition in a very intimate way. And something that's striking me, I think is also resonant in your work, Barış, but from a really different perspective. I mean, the word like that you're using is like shooting, but we're talking about shooting video footage, right? But there is a relationship between the act of taking an image and the act of like shooting a gun at the same time. And you see the sort of collapse of those moments in the invasion of the homes on Haifa Street with the found footage of soldiers who are both shooting their guns and shooting video at the same time.
And being shot at as well. Some of them, they get shot as they are in the raid. And this is captured on camera as well.
Yeah, and I think it just really, what it does for me, seeing that, it really gives me the understanding that taking an image is an act of power. And so Barış, I think, you know, you are also working with images, but instead of from inside you know, a structure or house, you have these really lovely aerial satellite images that you're using to render your work, but also sort of analyzing at the same time. I wondered if you could speak to that image making practices.
Yeah, actually, like I forget to tell that when I started to work on the tunnel warfare, so
sorry,
I found out.
Barış, could you speak up a little bit or approach the camera or something that would help? Thank you.
Of course. Actually, a lot of the footage I'm using actually is coming from declassified satellite image from 59 to 72. It was a project called Corona Project by the CIA. Actually, it was covering all the Middle East, and a group of academics have created like a kind of Google Earth version of it called Corona Atlas. I can share the link later, and it was the first images like of the all territory covering from Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, till Iran, to see if there was like during the Cold War, if like the Russian or the China will put some bases. So using this kind of images and seeing how actually it was declassified in '95 by Clinton, I start to negotiate how actually we can exploit these images and find a 0.0 in terms of visual culture, like of the landscape, because I'm like really interested in the idea of the landscape and as my mindscape, but also like as a landscape, like as a broad sense. And inside, and for me, it's like crucial to consider the entire landscape if you want to imagine and invent possible future by looking at the idea of occupation, our relation with the past, the rise of urbanism, the human land use, environment impacts, and the demographic impact of the state and empire. So with this Corona project, I found that actually, like while looking at the terrain of the site, I went further north and discovered actually like I could have like a 0.0 in time, which was in '59, to see actually the pre-dam politics of Turkey and the water politics they have done. And actually we will find the source of actually the huge transformation of the demography in all Syria, Iraq, and Kurdistan part in the south of Turkey, and see how actually he has like triggered a massive change of demographic balance in the region. So a lot of people, the peasant, will move from the Euphrates River because they will shift actually the river and will go to Sham or to Damas, and will change completely all the balance in the last 30 years. Same thing happened actually in the pre-war or in the Lebanon, I guess, and in Turkey, evidently, all the infrastructure of the dam, actually the new construction of like control station, outpost, actually is like reshuffling all the territory, but also with the geopolitical consequence. So using this this map, I used also like today's Google Earth, different satellites, archive, many of them. And I'm also digging also on the archive of actually for the excavation missions since the mid-1916. So it becomes like a traveling using those visuals at different temporality and to juxtapose them in time. Like Ahmad, also like in Majd were working. I saw actually the exhibition in Beirut, Dar el Nimr, actually, and you create a relation to scale. And I think like all of us have like, we are working on this idea of scale, how actually we can think about the scale of the geography, the land, but also historically, and about also the heritage and the memory of it. So in a way, it becomes an idea of an artistic excavation. It's more a question of how we connect memory with archaeology in a principle, but openings through geopolitics, through occupations, through lot of like psychological warfare, how it unfolds in narration.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for bringing up the issue of scale, because I wanted to go next to Areej and Eliza, because I see the relationship also between Barış, your work on like in proto-fiction, where you're working on an actual rune in Syria, but at the same time you have created a fictionalized account set in the future of that ancient civilization. And I see symmetry there with the playing with scale, with historical scale, and also sort of fictionalizing a narrative of travel that projects into the future in the work that you're doing with the Dido problem, Areej and Eliza. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
I mean, for the Dido problem, of course, there's so many different readings of the mythology. And for us, we wanted to use it as a starting point for fictionalizing the conditions of reality. Like, how can we go to Tunis and try to understand its present day reality and its geopolitics through bringing Dido into that realm, but also through finding her, like a continuation of her struggle present today. But also, like, how can we see this as a way to maybe imagine a different possibility? But the main thing about, because now the conversation about mapping and all that, is how she had an intuitive approach to land and territory. Like in mathematics, there's the isosymmetric problem, which is how can you encompass the largest area of ground if you have a fixed parameter. And then eventually, later on, it became something that is like classified. But how can this, maybe like borrowing this can allow us to maybe think about the politics or like the geopolitics of how map making and what constitutes a place and whatnot. So for us, it was like a tool to try to imagine, like, how if these existing borders were not there, how would things be differently? And when it's built in this, like when it's appropriate and design, like imposed into another virtual realm, how can it also be something that is more about not replicating an existing structure? So if we use virtual reality, how can we use it in a way where we can engage with the present differently, but without replicating all these systems?
Thank you, Areej. And actually, I'd love to go around and get the last comment or last response from each group or each artist as we draw to a close for our event today. And I'll riff off that last point that you've made there and perhaps frame the question as, do you think about your work as making an intervention in public perceptions of geography or the future or the possibilities for the region through the intervention in virtual reality or using these augmented reality, these sort of new technologies? So maybe if we start with, who hasn't spoken in a while, let's maybe start with Yass and Ahmed Isamaldin, if I can pass it on to you, and then perhaps we can go around and get everyone's last word on this question about public perception, and also about perhaps why this exhibit makes sense for your piece. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we just short it's probably that this is special technology is giving the opportunity for speculations and what's called, like, I think part of the mission of speculative design or speculative art in order to change perception. And I think computer generated image and integrated in reality could actually transcend what we want to talk about, the fluidity of mapping, telling two different stories in one place. Yeah, that what I'm thinking about, why these possibilities of we have also some still elements about why we use game as well object, because it has also games telling stories of binary from different perspective, being all the time the enemy in the game to be shooted, how we could actually change that to so speculation and critical in the same time. Where is technology used in the same time?
Yeah, exactly. That's what can echoing that. What it's about the skin of the archive. We took, like it's mentioned here, scale of archive, but also what is this archive? It's like it's not neglecting that the image, for example, Shara Haifa, but for me, like, you know, as person being in this context, the only I saw with these cars they were bodies of Iraqis around, you know, even if they are not told, you know. So because this image, it's from that point of view. It's not about the material itself, but it's about completing each other with it's about both of us in this place. It's not about the image or the power of the image, but it's about we as you know, as partners in the image, let's say, or in the conditions. So yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Again, I'm going to go around by pictures on my screen because I think that's easier, slightly more democratic. Ala, would you mind giving us your closing comments, your last response?
I agree with Ali. I'm always, when I'm producing these projects, I am thinking of course, like someone like Ali, like how would he look at this? How would he like process this project or have his own view about it? And I must say that in this particular project or development of the project or the research that I've done, there are so many parties that are also local in one way or another. They're not necessarily Iraqi, but they are part of the story as it happened. And whichever way we are talking about whoever, there involves an issue of representation or an issue of rendering someone as something. And this I find the most difficult to handle. Because we can, I mean, how comprehensive can anyways generate a research that could understand all the points of view, while even in a particular, like a group of people, there could also be like several ideas or several, and even in a story, one person's story can also be several feelings, developments, change of mind, etc., etc. So I think that these such like pluralities and such ideas, like possibilities of, you know, of endless, like, you know, limits, there's like no limits as if, kind of opens up the future also for the possibility of what's, you know, how is this read or interpreted or used or repurposed one way or another. I hope it gets repurposed somehow in a meaningful way, in a way that could also be meaningful. But I can't really I can't tell what's gonna happen with this by others. I mean, by how it's gonna be received or used or reused.
Yeah, how the work will sort of live on in the future. Lovely. Ahmed, can I pass over to you or to Majd for your thoughts on public perception, how your work might be changing that, or in general your closing comments?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? I'm not a person who thinks technology necessarily solves problems. So, and I think it's sometimes a dangerous narrative to think that. I think it can help to expose problems and to kind of, you know, highlight things, but yeah, that I think maybe Majd has better ideas about a kind of positivistic kind of
no, my background is in engineering and technology, so I earn my living by being a technologist, not an artist. But I think there's definitely like a grim kind of reading of the role of technology in public engagement. And I totally agree with Ahmed in that, but I don't think, like, the reason why we're both here is that we don't think that it's a completely lost cause. There is something, I am always inspired by the Luddites, who were like the public perception of them, the kind of the myth that has been perpetuated around them is that they're technologists or that they're anti-technology, but in reality they were more into using technology in a purposeful way. And I think one of the things that I like about this this exploration that we're doing is that it's kind of making us think about actually how can we be purposeful in the way that we talk, that we engage VR. Like we between the time that we were invited into this project and this conversation, Facebook was renamed into Meta, and now everyone is talking about the metaverse and virtual reality. And there's some really horrendous ways that you can be talking about that. Like, for example, like people are selling real estate in virtual reality, and I'm like, okay, you might as well be selling like that, like real estate on the moon. But there's a spatial dimension of that, and our maps also have a spatial dimension. And can we actually propose an alternative way of engaging with that that provides both a critical look, but also a positive example or a model that makes us actually think about the political futures.
Yes, and certainly a critical view on virtual reality is very welcome. I apologize if my question made it sound.
So I didn't mean to put it that way. Like it wasn't really meant to be a criticism of the question, but
it's the jaunty, enthusiastic tone of voice, I think. Areej, maybe Areej and Eliza, I can ask you to finish off, but particularly as I know that this is something you thought deeply about. Thank you. Just before we go on to Barış.
Yeah, we have a lot of discussions actually about like using VR, a lot of critical discussions, because we are also not just using it in a way that we celebrate it, because I think we always very aware of the fact that to not use like alien spaces that make the viewer even more passive or with a lack of some agency. And I think our aim is usually to make the viewer the opposite, like to bring them in some kind of reality they are familiar with, and like while like making them feel that there is some possible ways of alternative future imagination. And that's why we work a lot with like 360 footage, and then creating like very like slight shifts or cracks that make like offer some kind of gaps or temporal gaps into finding stories that they can relate to, like from the past, but like also going into future spaces. And yeah, so it's an ongoing conversation that we have, and we're struggling actually sometimes with the virtual reality, and also with the conversations we have with people and how they feel and how we feel. Like that's why we have to do even more testing whenever we create something.
Yeah, I mean the biggest inspiration or like something that we always go back to is this work that was done in the 90s, like the first experiment of using VR. And it was done by this Canadian artist who created a world called Osmos. And it was always about how can you view virtual reality not as an escapist kind of realm, and how can it not have all these like highly rendered, like a high definition replications of reality? How can it be something that can allow one to re-engage, reconnect with the actual realm differently? So what she did, she created this vest that allows you to navigate the space through breathing. So the more embodied you are in that space, the more disembodied the experience could be. So we always try to think of ways to have a connection between the real and the virtually rendered, and how can this always, yeah, like there is a lot of responsibility, and we're like also as a device, it was made for like a simulation of how can you be so distant from your action in war crimes and all these things. So it's not a very happy tool that we need to celebrate. I agree with Ahmed, and yeah, it's a continuous struggle.
Wonderful. Yeah, but Barış, can I have your take, and then I think Bridget will probably wrap up. And thank you so much, everybody, for all of this time. We really appreciate it, for hanging on in the depths of the evening in some places and the very early morning at the other end. So yeah, thank you. Barış, I don't think I can hear you. I don't know if that's the same.
Barış, you're muted.
I forgot. Okay, so I think each forms has its own political potentiality. So in terms of recreating futures through this device or through a form or a gesture or a grammar, a visual grammar, doesn't matter so much actually. And we, in a way, through all the work we are doing, we are encoding specific data, artifacts, memories, type of collections, and we are trying to make sense out of it and recreating some landscape, mindscape, and visual environments. So I don't know if it's the virtual reality is the idea of the future, but this is something that we will occupy, test, and see if we can unfold desire and will to elaborate form of liberation. So I think that's what I can say about it.
Well, thank you guys, every one of you, so much. We're just a little bit over time, but I wanted to end with a summary thought. So we are all scattered all over the world, all of us on this Zoom call, and it's really a privilege to be able to be in conversation through this virtual medium today. But I think one of the things that, or there are two main things that shine through for me when you see the works together. And one is the kind of map that emerges by traveling through each of these works together as a collection, that you're really charting a new way of exploring, seeing, and experiencing a region that has been so determined by a kind of hegemonic way of engaging something that we, like in the United States, often call the Middle East. So, thanks for the work that you're doing to push a new entry point, to push a new kind of geography and a new mode of engagement. And also thanks for the critical work that you're doing to engage technology, to think about its nefarious uses, and also to push how we might experience virtual media. What are the ethical modes of engagement there? How can we reappropriate those technologies and use them to illuminate submerged histories, or to articulate a political call? And I think, each of the works that you're doing is certainly very far from Facebook's metaverse and much more embodied, historically located practice. So thank you guys all for the work that you're doing. And we look forward to being in conversations with you as we head toward the exhibit, which will launch in fall 2024. And we'll provide details about the project as they emerge. We're in the process of putting this all together. So thank you all so much. Thanks to ASI, thanks to Georgetown and George Mason. Thank you to the Middle East Center at University of Pennsylvania, and thank you to the Phillips Gallery at Franklin and Marshall College. Until next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
That's all.
Bye. Take care.